Images of hell have proved irresistible to filmmakers for over 100 years. In particular, and perhaps not surprisingly, it's the horror genre that delights in simulating the great abyss. But you'll also find hell in comedy, schmaltzy drama, and kids' movies as well. Before we dive in to the specific examples of hell on film, it's worth considering that depicting hell is part of a long and a rich historical tradition, where writers and artists through the ages have tried to imagine what might happen after death. Yet if you were to chart the history that leads to the cinematic hells, you'll find their main source is in Western Christianity. It's true enough that the ancient Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians had ideas, and very rich and interesting ideas about the afterlife, but they weren't quite as obsessed with the potential horror of death as Christians seem to be. The 4th century in particular was a time when church theologians like St. Augustine started expanding on the apocalyptic symbols of the Bible. But it was 1,000 years later, in 1320, when the Italian Dante Alighieri wrote a poem that has really fixed the image of hell into the public consciousness, with symbols and ideas that affect cinema to this day. Now, Dante's epic poem, The Divine Comedy, describes Dante's travels through heaven, purgatory, and what is frankly the most interesting bit, the Inferno. Here, hell is a complex funnel of descending circles with rivers of blood that boil souls, and we see eerie forests of people who are eternally melded into tree stumps as a punishment for their suicide. It's packed with haunting and intense imagery, and we see its influence on that other great work of hell, John Milton's Paradise Lost. But we really see Dante's ideas thousands of years later in the cinema. For example, one of the first known examples of hell on film is the silent movie L'Inferno from 1911. This was Italy's first feature-length film, and they certainly started with a movie of scale and ambition. It's a still impressive theatrical staging of Dante's poem, and it's controversial too. There's a short sequence in it that shows the Prophet Muhammad, who's been damned forever, and as per the poem, he's complete with his entrails hanging out. L'Inferno wasn't just successful in Italy, it turned out to be an international hit and made a fair bit of money in the US as well. Now, even a cursory glance through L'Inferno shows you the unmistakable influence of one of the prime illustrators of Dante's works, and that is Gustav Dori. Now, he was a French sculptor and artist whose renditions of Dante's poems had a very significant influence over the cinematic hell. His woodcuts of deep chasms and coiling serpents and naked writhing bodies don't only crop up in L'Inferno, but they've actually become the common visual furniture of the cinematic hell. Dore also illustrated Milton's Paradise Lost with very similar symbols, and along with the artwork of William Blake, we start to get that sense from art and literature that this is what hell looks like. Just as a recent example, you'll see Dante's influence in the second installment of the Coffin Joe trilogy from Brazil. The brilliantly titled This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse from 1967 looks like a twisted Wizard of Oz, but the majority of the movie is shot in moody black and white until we enter a lengthy and nightmarish sequence in hell. The stagey foam rock sets might look like something from a Star Trek episode, but what's happening to the people in it is far more in keeping with Dore and Dante. Naked sinners covered in what looks like chalk dust and mud writhe along the floor while hell's guards prod them with spears, and some particularly unlucky sinners are even fused with the rock itself. Now, this is all to the constant soundtrack of painful moans, explosive flashes, and bizarrely a wild chimpanzee screaming off camera. Wind back to 1924, and we find Hollywood depicting the Dante Dori hell in the 1924 silent film Dante's Inferno, directed by Henry Otto. But the better-known American depiction came 9 years later. Dante's Inferno, the 1935 version, starred Spencer Tracy as Jim Carter, a greedy fairground showman who puts on lurid depictions of Dante's Inferno for sensation-loving punters. But when he goes too far, he's presented with a vision of the real Inferno that's epic and haunting, a live-action vision of Dori's illustrations. Now, unlike the previous versions of the Inferno, this was 1935, and so it was possible to use recorded sound in the film so that the unsettling special effects were coupled with the fluttery strings and groaning choral work of a full orchestra. The effect is a genuinely bleak and still quite astonishing vision of hell that further cemented Dante's vision into the public consciousness. Here we see the high stony crags and the endlessly deep chasms while flakes of fire descend and flashing smoke belches up. These are classic symbols of the popular ideas of hell. Now these early Dante, Dori sort of images of hell grew even more influential in cinema because the footage from those films were recycled so much in other movies. In 1935, that version borrowed from the 1924 version, which itself borrowed from the Italians' L'Inferno from 1911, and footage from all of these hell films, and others like it, for example Machistian Hell from 1925, was still being reused decades later, cropping up in exploitation crime movies like Maniac and Hellivision from the 30s, all the way to art films of the 50s, and in Ken Russell's mind-bending science fiction drug thriller Altered States from 1980, where we get, yet again, footage from these very early hell films. And so the Dante influence is strongly felt in many films. For example, the schmaltzy but still visually inventive drama What Dreams May Come from 1998. It was based on a novel by horror legend Richard Matheson, where Robin Williams hops down from heaven to hell to save his wife, who's trapped down there for crimes of suicide. The film based on it certainly goes for a pat on the back comfort rather than scares, but there are still some unsettling images of hell to be found. From pale naked bodies writhing and grabbing at a boat to faces stuck fast into the ground. These are all Dante-fueled visions. You get similar imagery in Lucio Fulci's The Beyond from 1981, where hell is a dark and dusty wasteland with bodies strewn presumably for miles, maybe hundreds or thousands even. It's a chilling image. And Dante keeps cropping up in horror movies today too. For example, we get a reference to him in the 2014 Da Vinci Code style horror film As Above, So Below, where a team of explorers trek through the underground catacombs of Paris. When they find the gates of hell, it happens to have the exact same inscriptions as the Hell Gate in Dante. Abandon hope, all ye who enter here. Ignoring it obviously brings a whole slew of supernatural terror and trouble. Now, these films are just a few examples of how the apocalyptic literature of the Bible was expanded upon by theologians and then writers and artists to such an influential extent that it's not a stretch to say that Dante and his illustrator Dore and Milton and Blake were really the original storyboarders of the cinematic hell.